Hello, everyone, and welcome to the midweek program at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. My name is Blake, and I'm the education assistant here at the Arboretum, and today we are in the White Garden because we've got quite a few nice little plants here that we want to show off. Today we've got a program for you. Our research technician, Tim Alderton, is going to be showing off his top plant picks, not just his top plant picks of all time, but top plant picks for this time of year, because there is quite a lot of interesting and visually appealing stuff going on at the garden in January, and Tim wants to show you a few selections of his favorites. Those of you who are watching this on YouTube, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our channel, and feel free to leave a comment down below. And with the announcements out of the way, I think we can pass things over to Tim to tell us about his top plant picks.
Okay, yes, the top plant picks, that's a big question a lot of times that we get. What's your favorite plant? And asking a gardener that is not a good question, especially one who works with about 7,000 different taxa here in the garden, and I've seen quite a few different things over the years. So this is a top plant picks for me of right now. And there's different reasons for each of these, and I'll probably, if I remember, I'll explain why I like the next several plants. We're going to talk about, hopefully about 5 in the next few minutes we have together. And so, yeah, it's what's going on now, and but some of them may have a much, well, I mean, I might like them other times of the year too. So there's at least 1 or 2 of them of the 5 plants that I really like. So anyways, to get this started, my first one is right behind me, actually. And I'm hoping that Alexander here to zoom in behind me if I'm not in the way. There is Galanthus all over the ground underneath the maple here that Blake was mentioning early on, our 110 to 120 year old weeping Japanese maple here has Galanthus elwesii underneath it. Galanthus elwesii, there's a lot of variation in it, reality, other than, I mean, it's white flowers, but there's a lot of time that it flowers, a long period that you'll see different forms flowering over. And that's part of the reason I like this species. But so of Galanthus in general, there's about 20 species or so. They've been finding and naming a few new ones in the recent years, but elwesii has been around since 1874, when Henry John Elwes, who was a British botanist and entomologist, he was exploring Turkey, and he identified this species. And I don't know if he named it after himself or someone named it for him. I'm hoping someone named it for him. I don't think he was probably that narcissistic that he did it that way. But speaking of another bulb, anyways, the Galanthus elwesii behind me is one that flowers for us, depending on the selection, over a very long period. The earliest of them actually have finished flowering, and that's Galanthus elwesii variety Montastictus. And that's one that we actually have in a couple spots now in the garden. There's actually, mixed in this whole group, there's some in the back, and they start flowering as early as the second week in November. And they flower for about a month each different clone. So they'll go the whole way into the middle to end of March some years. So I'll still have them flowering here. It's just a really wonderful bloomer for us over a long period. And one of the common names for this species is the giant flowered Galanthus or snowdrop. So, and I did some research on it just a little bit. I found out like who Elwes was. I didn't really know, to tell you the truth, until I did this, but I didn't really know the origins of Galanthus for that matter. So Gala apparently means milk, and anthus flower, so milk flower, is another name for this. And we had a new volunteer who actually, he's finished up for us already. He was a student here at NC State and graduated, and he was from the Netherlands, and he's returned to the Netherlands. He's actually an Olympian and will be in the Paris Olympics here in a few months, and he was in the Tokyo Olympics. But anyways, I showed him this plant one day, and he says, oh yeah, we call that, I think it translates to milk flower, and it didn't hit me. So now I know why. So anyways, these just have a wonderfully long season for us here. And I did dig a handful of, this is the elwesii Arboretum monostictus that flowered for us earlier in the season. And you wonder, why would I dig this now? But this is a wonderful time when they're just past flowering to divide them, if you have any, that is. If you don't have any, you get them as dry bulbs. Plant them when you can get them. They're harder to establish from dry bulbs, but they will establish sometimes. And once you get a clump going, you can divide it. And the perfect time to do it is just after they flower in the green. So I have 4 really nice bulbs here, maybe 5 or 6 in reality, if I really got down and split it. But whenever they're done flowering, if you have them, it's a wonderful time to divide them for yourself or share them with a friend. So who has any of these, any of the Galanthus in general, you might want to do that later on in the season. But right now, when they're in the green, it's the best time to do it. You'll have the best luck at starting them. So the next plant I have for me is, we had pictures. I don't know, were you scrolling through any of my Galanthus pictures? That's fine if you didn't, because I have good pictures, or plants back behind me. But the next one, I don't have a complete a plant next to me for it, is the Mahonia. And there's a lot of different Mahonias, and I was actually in a conversation with a person walking through the garden earlier, and they were saying, oh, aren't they invasive? That invasivity is an issue that we often hear about with some of the plants in the Arboridaceae, including Mahonia. This is one, I have never seen a fruit on this one, let alone a seedling. This is Mahonia, let's see if I can spit out, lindsayi, and then the cultivar is Cantab. It's a hybrid, which apparently happened naturally in the wild in Southeast Asia. This is a branch I cut off of our large plant that's over in the winter garden, and it flowers each late December, January, and into February typically most years. I like it for different reasons. I really like plants that are fragrant, and this has wonderful fragrance. And this one, a lot of the Mahonias that we have in cultivation are these really rigidly upright plants that they look like they're starched. That is, they have no movement to them. This one, on the other hand, it has much more relaxed habit. Because of that, it causes some issues. That is, it's not produced commercially because of that. Excuse me. That relaxed habit is not necessarily the best for production, and nurserymen don't produce it. But the history on this one, I learned a little bit this morning, is that it's a hybrid between Mahonia japonica, which I said about the fragrance. The Mahonia japonica, we have straight Mahonia japonica in the garden, and it smells of lily of the valley. That's one of my favorite flower fragrances. So, and I miss that. We don't have a lot of them down here in the north in Pennsylvania, where I'm from. Lily of the valley grows very well. It'll grow here, but it's not as happy here as up there. And also, like I mentioned before, this has a much more relaxed habit. That comes from the other species, Mahonia siamensis or deluxiana, whatever you want to, lumper, splitter, old name, new name, I don't know. I also saw that it might have been a lamarifolia, but that would make it an exmadia, which this does not look like an exmadia. And from what they believe, it is now a siamensis. But anyway, so the seed was actually collected in around 1930 in Yunnan by, let's see, it looks like George Forrest and Lawrence Johnston of Hitcoat, as well as La Sierra de la Madrone Gardens, who went on expedition then in the 30s, and they brought back seed. They didn't exactly know what they had at the time, but they grew out the seeds, and that is, Lawrence did, and he had these at Hitcoat in England, and planted them on his property. And later on, he apparently gifted the Hitcoat to, I believe, to the National Trust in England, and some of the plants were disseminated from there into Cambridge, I believe, is who they, university was able to get some of the seedlings from that, including this one. And one of the workers who had been at Hitcoat at that time was let's see if I think I have, Nora Lindsay, hence lindsayi being the specific epithet that's been associated with this hybrid. So they believe it is, like I said, a hybrid between japonica and siamensis. And like I said, I like the relaxed habit of it, and the wonderful fragrance. And the florets, the individual florets on this are probably, they don't look very big, but they are probably double the size of almost any other Mahonia that you're going to see. So it has very large flowers as well, and the color is wonderful to add to that fragrance. And it is a little bit large probably for most gardens, but it gets about 6 to 8 feet tall, but it might get 8 or 12 feet wide just because of that relaxed habit. So, but if you can find it, and I have propagated this one in the past, and we occasionally distribute it that way, it is one to take advantage of if you can find Mahonia lindsayi cantab. So, the next plant I have is, I think you should have some pictures, a couple anyways, is Cynara syriaca. And you may wonder why I chose that plant, but you might not know what that plant is. It's a thistle of all things. And does anybody eat artichokes? Actually, I don't, but lots of people do. But this is probably one of the parents of our domesticated artichokes, which are now put into Cynara cardunculus, and then variety cardunculus or form of cardunculus, something like that. The cardoons and the artichokes are in that species. For us, it's a cool season active plant, and I grow it for its foliage mostly, though it does flower in late spring, early summer, before it goes summer dormant. I have a leaf here. I don't know if Alexander can get that or not. It is a little bit spiny. Not all of our plants here in the garden have this wicked of spines, but some of them do. I think there is some variation in it, and maybe it could also be a hybrid, but either way, the growth on these, they grow actively through our cool season, so they make a great winter statement in the landscape. I'm hoping that you can see some of that in the 2 or 3 pictures that I have that I gave Blake. The plants form a vase-shaped plant, maybe like 2 to 3 feet wide and a couple feet tall when they're in active growth. If we do get much below 20 or in the lower 20s to upper teens, it does get winter damage to it, but it quickly recovers from that. So it does gives you something different to use in your landscape through the winter months. And I really find it attractive for that. We haven't had any real cold spells so far this season, so there are some in a couple spots now. I planted them this season. So you can see them out near the new pathway we have going from the main border to the rose garden. I have a clump of them, and I have a couple stuffed into the perennial border actually just outside the white garden as well, and that's actually where this leaf came from. But later on, like I said, in late spring, early summer, they do flower, and you'll get about a 6 foot tall plant with enormous thistles on it, flowers on it, which are purple. The bees adore it. The bumblebees will just go through it like a lawn. They're just, looks like they're grazing like a cow in a pasture. So it's just a really cool plant, but I like it, like I said, for its winter foliage, which is wonderful to have some of that texture in at this time of the year. So on to my 4th plant, which is, I don't know if I didn't tell you exactly. I should have told you a little more about Cynara, shouldn't I? It's actually, they believe originally would have been found in Cyprus, Iran, Lebanon, and Syria, and so the Middle East in general. I saw some references to Israel as well. So, that whole area there is where you're going to find it in the wild. And that's, the center of Mediterranean food, and of course where artichokes, what we associate artichokes with, and where they were domesticated. So again, now on to our 4th plant, Agave ovatifolia. That is one, that's a plant that I don't have one to show you right here, and it's difficult to take a cutting of that. Just a sample, because, well, the sample would be this big and weigh about 50 or 60 pounds, if not 100. Very fleshy. That is probably the plant on this list that I would say is my one of my all-time favorites year-round. We have a couple different forms in the garden, one that's named actually, and then we have some seedlings. So it's Agave ovatifolia again, and we have one called,
Frosty Blue.
Frosty Blue, thank you, which is out, and currently I have one out in front of the Lath House. Prior to 2020, when I had one flower in the monocot garden, there was one out there as well. They're quite fast growing. It's a species that's actually found from northern Mexico, and let's see if I can tell you where. Let's see, it's found between like 3,700 feet to around 7,000 feet in the Sierra de Lamprazos in northern Nuevo Leon in northern Mexico, so northeast Mexico. At times it had been lumped into a couple different species associated with perii, which is one that we do grow here. It slowly spreads. Well, ovatifolia gets way bigger than any of the perii. And it also is a solitary species. So I find the solitary species of agave probably a little bit better for our landscapes on average than some of the suckering species that form great big colonies, and if you don't watch out, will eat up your landscape. And it's like, what person can I give another one to? The ovatifolia stays a nice solitary plant. It'll get about 3 to 5 feet tall depending on the selection of the foliage, just 3 to 5 feet tall. And it might be 4 to 6, even 7 feet wide. So it's this low, beautiful blue mound. I don't know if you can see that in our pictures. Those are just straight perii that I have in the photos right there in the PowerPoint. And those were planted actually in the garden in 2019 from about 3.5 to 4 inch pots. So those really have grown. Those were in front of the necessary, and I actually relocated them due to the current renovations that are going on over there right now into a new bed going towards the rose garden again, and that's where you'll find the Cynara syriaca as well, growing right next to them. I've liked, again, the silver blue foliage on the agave ovatifolia is just enough to grow it. I mean, it's an easy growing agave for us, fast growing. Frosty Blue I planted a little bit earlier. In 2014 is when I believe I stuck that one into the ground over there. And it was, again, from a small plant that was in a 3 or 4 inch pot at the time. So it's about to the age I believe it should start to flower. And the only thing with agaves is, especially the solitary species, is they flower, then they die. So agave ovatifolia, I figure you get a 10 to 15 year life expectancy out of it, and then it flowers and it dies. But by that time, you are probably wanting to renovate your garden anyways. So it gives you the opportunity to swap things out, and you'll get a 10 to 15 foot flower stalk on it, and it's quite spectacular in itself when they do flower. But they are beautiful and architectural for the 10 to 15 years prior to that. So you get a lot of bang for your buck out of that, especially whenever it goes out with a real big bang and it flowers. And that, like I said, is probably one of my top 5 year-round favorites in the garden. And going back to the plant names, I did look up a little bit about the plant name on it, and it's never hit me. And I've looked at the names, meanings of certain plant names, and ovatus is the base for ovatifolia, or ovus and folius. So ovus meaning egg. It didn't hit me that on that, and so they're somewhat egg-shaped leaves. They're fairly broad in comparison to their actual length, and then folius, so leaf, on that. So egg leaf would be a basic translation of the name for the specific epithet of that. But commonly you'll see it now as a whale's tongue agave, and it was actually, I don't think they officially identified it until relatively recent, until the early 2000s. It was assigned that name. Again, it had been lumped in with some other species at that point. So, but it is probably one of the best species for us here in Raleigh. Some of our other large growing agaves, I say they get stretch marks when we have snow or ice. The leaves will bend over due to the ice or snow on them, and then on the undersides of them, which become apparent when the leaf goes back up, it will leave marks on it. So you don't get that on ovatifolias due to that really broad leaf, and it's just one of the most spectacular for us here. So one I truly highly recommend for you in the landscape. And the final plant I have and I have a little sample here from it, but is Araucaria arcana hybrid crossed with Araucaria angustifolia. For me, this one is kind of really cool because I recently took a trip to Argentina about a month ago. I was in western Argentina for almost 2 weeks. And I had the opportunity to see both of these parent species. Actually, the one I saw in Buenos Aires for the day I was actually in Buenos Aires on the way down to this trip I was taking. And so the Araucaria angustifolia is where I saw that. And I think that should be one of the first pictures that I have there that I gave Blake. And it is a subtropical species, and it's a little bit tender for us through our winter months here, and it's not overly happy. And I've had them in the garden, and I've killed them. After just a relatively short amount of time. The other parent is Araucaria arcana, and I had the probably once in a lifetime experience of being able to wander through forest of Araucaria arcana in western Argentina, and it ventures into Chile as well. Right across the border, and I got to see them by the thousands. That was probably one of the coolest experiences I've ever had in my life. So that tree, our hybrid one, okay, we can't grow Araucana here reliably either. It does not like our summers. It says it's too hot and sticky here, and it rots and dies, typically. Though I've recently stuck a couple in the ground to kill probably in just a few years. They'll tend to last a few years until they get 6 or 8 feet tall, and then they fizzle out. But we'll see what happens. So anyways, the Araucarias in general are boys and girls. They're dioecious, so you have separate trees. And our tree, who was planted in 2012 in the garden, we got her, I think, in about 2010, if I remember correctly from the records. And it was actually, its origin, I looked it up, I didn't realize initially, was from some seed that we got a seedling from the Montgomery Botanic Center in Florida. And they had gotten seed from the rare palm seed, which is online. It's an online seed company, actually. But they had gotten F2 seeds from plants that were in a hybrid population in Argentina. So kind of came full circle for me with that one, having had the opportunity to travel to Argentina. But the common name of Araucarias, or at least Araucaria arcana, is monkey puzzle. And if you've ever seen or get to see one of the straight species of Araucana, you'd understand. It is rather sharp. So anyways, but this is a young cone I have here because our plant is a female. We don't have a male. I'm hoping maybe one of the ones I've recently put into the garden, which are only 6 inches tall, might make it to for the size that it might actually produce cones, and maybe we'll find out one is a boy. I'd like to have a mate for my one, and maybe we could get some viable cones. Our girl, she will produce cones, but they have no viable embryos in them. So we aren't getting any real seed on them, but it has been doing very well in the garden. Planted it just after we finished the Lath House in 2012. And so it's been in the grounds for actually almost over 11 years now. She's done very well and has only gone off color one time due to a cold spell, I think in 2018, but came back normal coloration. And that doesn't surprise me after finally being able to see them in the wild, the Araucaria arcana in particular, and seeing where it grows on mountainsides, in very arid areas, but also mountainsides of volcanoes, which get excessive amounts of snow. And there was snow on, there was a dusting of snow just about a month ago on the one population I was able to walk among in the morning. So despite it being the equivalent of early to mid-June when I was down there, which was, in their case, actually early December. anyways, those are my top picks from this. And I think I have a video there. If it'll play, you can see I was standing in a grove of Araucaria arcana, mixed with an understory of Nothophagus, which is one of the southern beaches. And I was just in awe, and I'm hoping that might go through in that little video. So give you a little bit of zen. And let's see, I've forgotten which mountain that I was on, but anyways, I had walked into Chile that morning, literally feet into Chile, and then walked back out. They had a little higher, probably about a mile or so from where that was taken.
I love the texture on the bark on these.
Oh yes, the bark is spectacular on them. There was also a brook of snow melt coming down through this grove, and the ground was covered in Galanthus species. So that would be like tea berries or wintergreen species that we call them here in the north. And there was actually a couple species, but most of them are of one species, and the fruit ranged from white to pale pink to almost a red color, and then others were, the other species actually had red fruit. So it was really cool just seeing all that together.
That sounds really lovely. And that little video you shot, that was very zen, very peaceful. I did enjoy it. So we did have some questions. Debbie asked, do squirrels and deer like to eat Galanthus? She says that's a big problem for her in her yard.
General? I don't think so. I have squirrels in the garden. I don't have deer, and I do. They are in the Emeraldaceae, or what used to be Emeraldaceae. I think it's now lumped into the Asparagaceae, as everything seems to be. But anyways, so they're related to your daffodils, and typically nothing touches them. Your amaryllises, your hippie-eastrums, not your amaryllis. They don't really grow here. Your lycoris, those are all related. They typically have somewhat toxic chemicals in them that at least keep the deer from eating them. Squirrels do not seem to like the bulbs as well, so they're pretty darn safe.
For sure. Yeah, and we did have a comment in the chat from Marilyn, who is a longtime member of ours. And just to highlight what I was
Did she say that it didn't eat hers?
Yeah, she's had no issues with Galanthus in her yard.
Marilyn always counters me that her deer have eaten it, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. And as I was saying in the announcements earlier, we're going to be having a class with Bryce where we're celebrating the vast wealth of knowledge that we have amongst our members. Like, we learned, Marilyn has a lot of information to share from her ongoing war with the deer in her land. So that's great information. And she's also shared something interesting about Galanthus previously that I learned from her, was that they dry out really quickly, and you can't let them dry out if you wanna plant them. So you were saying now's a good time to divide them?
As soon as they're done flowering. This is from Monostictus, which flowered about a month and a half ago. So those are perfectly a great time to divide those. But as soon as if you have them in your own garden, it's a great time to share them with friends or move them about your own landscape. And
tell your friends, put them in the ground now, because you don't want them to dry out. So we're learning, we're sharing. This is great. We're all growing together. Love it here. Okay. Another question. Jackie wants to know if you have any favorite native plants that do their thing most spectacularly in winter.
Later on in the winter, right now, most things are starting to be, pretty slow. Though I did notice this morning I can't remember which species, but we have a trillium species in the garden. It's from Gainesville, Florida, the selection anyways, which is the southern extreme for the species. And I'm blanking on the species, but some of our trilliums are wonderful winter active species and native. And we are in the center of diversity for trilliums in the southeastern United States. Actually, mostly western North Carolina and upstate South Carolina and Georgia and Tennessee, where that all comes together. That's where it all happens. Though there's species throughout the southeast and over in a few western United States species as well as East Asian. But those would be really good winter active natives.
Yeah.
And later on, and when you get into February and March, there's a ton of native ephemerals that we have that become much more apparent.
But with regards to Trillium, over at Duke Gardens, they have a rather wonderful collection of Trilliums.
And those would probably be our local native species. They're tend to be a little bit later flowering than, say, this Florida form of this one. And there's a couple other Gulf Coast species that flower a little bit earlier than our true native ones to this locale. But yes.
For sure. So definitely worth going over there and looking at that as well. Nancy wants to know if you have any witch hazel favorites.
Actually, I do. I mean, any of the Hemamelis intermedias or mollis or japonicas are wonderful species for us here. They're not our native ones, though we do also have some of the native ones as well. The vernalis and some of the vernalis hybrids, they are getting some that have better color. One I do like of that, and we don't have in the garden anymore, but I would love to get it back, is amethyst. It is pink. Most of vernalis are kind of a coppery color, and they're rather small florets in comparison to that of the Asian ones. That's why I say the intermedias in the japonica and mollis, those tend to have a larger, much more noticeable flower than our native ones. And they're much more widely available, and they are often nicely fragrant, as our native ones as well, or our native ones too. Virginiana is done flowering by this time. It's a fall flowering species, but vernalis. And now another species, which I think the next week or so that Greg is going to hunt for in Louisiana, is ovatis, which is a relatively newly identified or recognized species. So it's a counterpart to vernalis. So.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing all that. And that looks like that is all the questions that we have in the chat for today. So thank you very much, Tim, for sharing with us your top plant picks for January. There was some really visually interesting and some good plants there.
No problem. I'm hoping everybody enjoyed that.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We will be back next Wednesday at 3 o'clock. As usual, we will be sitting down with Mark Wethington, our director. He will be new year, new plant obsession. So we're checking in with Mark to see what he's looking forward to for 2024. So we hope you will join us for that. We'll see y'all then. Y'all take care.